All right, dudes, it's fitting that they are America's team because I think America is trying to figure out what this team is doing in free agency. It has been just nothing. It's been essentially nothing.
They're all in
So,
though, Breach. Remember, they're all in.
yeah, they're all in. Jerry says they're all in. They're all in. So you're looking at this team who
Yeah.
is apparently all in. What is their next move? They haven't even really made a move. What's their next move?
Well, there's so much to dig into when you look at the Dallas Cowboys because you got to go back to Jerry's remarks, pre-playoffs last year, and he said this team will only go as far as Dak Prescott takes us, right? Then he gets asked and peppered with questions at the Senior Bowl, and his response and the way he kind of said it was interesting, Breach, because he was like, "I told you we'd only go as far as Dak took us, and we went as far as he took us." So to me, when an owner says something like that, is there true faith and belief that Dak can take that next step to get them to an NFC Championship game? And I remember asking our very own Brady Quinn and Danny Cannell, I asked him this question because I hadn't heard anybody ask this question. I was like, is there any scenario, and this was literally like maybe a month and a half ago, Breach, where you see the Dallas Cowboys, even though Dak Prescott number is unprecedented at 60 plus million as a cap hit, is there any scenario do you see them having him play that out and then him being the free agent? They were like, no way. And the reason I asked that just because I was reading Jerry Jones's body language. He was kind of telling you which direction they were shifting in. Now, you got to be careful if you're Jerry Jones because the grass isn't always greener on the other side. I think people, get enamored with what Patrick Mahomes can do, but that's a reason why he's a mini GOAT, right? There's not a lot of Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrows walking around. So my thing is if you replace Dak Prescott, you better have a really good plan to replace him because you're talking about a team that has, if I'm not mistaken, had 12 wins in 3 straight seasons. Like, that's hard to do, and it's hard to replace. Yes, they've bottomed out in the playoffs, but they've gotten to the playoffs where a lot of teams would wish for that type of success. The Dallas Cowboys are like, because they're the star, it's not enough. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out. And maybe Jerry Jones saying we're going all in means we're going to absolutely do nothing so people talk about us, right? Because that's exactly what has happened.
It is crazy, and it does seem like reading Jerry's body language and kind of his comments that it's not exactly a vote of confidence for Dak Prescott that, hey, look, we're going to slow down, not really talk about a new contract right now. And, if you're Dak Prescott, I don't see how this works out well for Jerry because if the Cowboys are bad this season, then you don't give Dak a new contract. You move on. You take a huge dead cap hit in 2025, and you have to find a new quarterback. If Dak leads you to the Super Bowl, then you're going to be paying him $70 million a year because you were too dumb to give him an extension right now. So, there's no upside really to letting him play the contract out.
Well, isn't this the same scenario that happened when he was about to hit free agency the first time, right? And he ends up getting hurt, and Dallas saw what life was like without him. And then they end up making him the highest paid quarterback coming off an injury. And then you can even take it one step further, Breach. Kirk Cousins, if I'm not mistaken, is 36 or 37 years old, and he's coming off a torn Achilles. Breach, what did he just get paid per year?
A lot. 4 years.
$50 million. Like, what do you think Dak Prescott is going to get on the open market? And again, I do think Dak needs to play better in, critical situations in the playoffs. But again, unless you have an alternative answer, what are you going to do? Who are you going to pick to play in Dallas? Because we know you're under a microscope when you play for the star. Not everybody can handle that type of pressure. Dak has been able to do it with class. He hasn't had any trouble off the field, right? Now, again, you want him to perform his best when it's critical, but what's the opposite, or what else can you do? Because guys like Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, they're not being made available to trade for. So what is your answer ultimately? Is it to go to the draft, which in one of my mock drafts, I actually had him taking Michael Penix Jr. because of this situation at pick 18. He could sit for a year and then potentially take over the next year. I think it makes a lot of sense, but that would be their only route, right? Is to go through the draft and try to find a franchise quarterback of the future. But you talked about it. That dead cap hit is so enormous. Again, Dak has all the leverage in this situation right now. But let me get back to the original question. What do they need? Offensive tackle for sure, right? They lost Tyron Smith. There's been rumors that the other Smith could potentially move back to left tackle, but I think that would be a mistake. He's been an all-pro guard. I would leave him at guard. So I think they need to fill that void at tackle either via draft or try to find somebody to trade for. receiver is another spot, right? I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Brandon Cooks is in his last year's deal, and then CeeDee Lamb is about to get paid. You need to bring in another young receiver. And then who's starting at running back for the Dallas Cowboys right now? I think if the season started, Deuce Vaughn would be the starting running back right now for the Dallas Cowboys. So they need a running back as well. So they have a lot of issues for a team that, consistently wins and goes to the playoffs. There's a lot of holes on this team right now.
Yeah, and what's funny is that every hole you mentioned is on offense, and guess who's going to have to make that offense look good despite all those holes? Dak Prescott, the guy you don't want to pay.
Stand him up for a fail.
Exactly. It's crazy. I mean, you're putting so much pressure on him. Be like, okay, well, we're not going to give you a third wide receiver. Brandon Cooks is kind of old. CeeDee Lamb's obviously a legit number one, but you don't have a lot of depth there. And as you said, maybe Tyler Smith is the left tackle, but probably better at guard. So you've got a little bit of question mark at left tackle. And like you mentioned, there's no running back. So Dak's going to have to carry the load. So I don't know what this plan is. I don't know what they're doing.
They're all in, Breach. And that's the thing. People have been wondering. I'm like, is Jerry trying to sabotage Dak because you're asking him to do more, right? By not giving him an extension and lowering his cap hit, but he literally has no weapons to work with, right? Not only did Tyron Smith leave, Tyler Biadasz left, and not only did he leave, he went to a divisional foe in the Washington Commanders. So, not only did they steal your center, they got stronger within the division by stealing your center. So there's a lot of needs on offense, and that's why people are questioning what Jerry Jones is doing. If you're not, going to restructure Dak, at least try to figure out something to give him some help so he can actually have success on offense.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone knows what Jerry Jones is doing. I don't think he knows what he's doing, and maybe that's why they haven't been to a conference title game since 1995. But you know who has been to a conference title game since 1995? The Philadelphia Eagles. Look, we talked about Aaron Donald's retirement a little bit earlier with the Rams. Eagles have also been hit by a couple retirements, Jason Kelsey, Fletcher Cox. And this is a team that melted down the stretch. And, losing your center is not ideal. Dudes, what do you think is this team's biggest need right now?
I think it has to be the secondary. When you look at the secondary, James Bradbury and also Big Play Slay are getting up there in age, right? I think you need to attack the secondary. Now they did, went and signed C.J. Gardner-Johnson, right? I think they just gave Reed Blankenship some type of extension as well. I think Cooper DeJean makes a lot of sense in the first round. A guy that can play multiple positions in that secondary. He can play in the slot. He can play safety. He can play on the outside at corner as well. Then you look at offensive tackle, right? Lane Johnson's getting up there in age. I know you said Kelsey is left, but Cam Jurgens was literally groomed to come in behind Jason Kelsey and take over at center. So I think they'll be fine when it comes to the interior offensive line. I think maybe even in the second or third round, attack that offensive tackle position just because Lane Johnson is getting up there in age. And then linebacker too, right? You did sign Devin White, but Nakobe Dean has struggled to stay healthy. Devin White is probably coming off his worst career year in football. I think they need to attack that linebacking position as well.
Yeah, and it does seem like at least the secondary, which is the first one you mentioned, has been an issue for them just for whatever reason. And they've attacked it. They've
coaching, players getting up there in age.
It's just nothing will work. It's cursed. They can't make anything. We'll see if C.J. Gardner-Johnson will help out there. And as you said, when you have guys like Darius Slay, James Bradbury, you expect them to perform at a certain level. And when they don't, kind of leaves you stuck between a rock and a hard place because you're thinking, well, we need to bring in someone else. But then you're also hoping these guys will re-up and play at the level they were playing at a few years ago. So, I do think it'll be interesting to see what the Eagles do going forward. Let's get to the New York Football Giants. Man, this team, a lot of issues last season. The owner calling out Brian Dable at the owners meeting. I mean, everything's going on. We don't know what's up with Daniel Jones. What's this team's biggest need?
I think they need a true number one receiver, first and foremost. They need somebody that can help Daniel Jones. And maybe they even need a quarterback when it comes to that as well. There are rumors that the Giants brass is doing extensive homework on all the quarterbacks in this draft, and they're in the prime spot at number 6 to potentially take one of the top 5 guys. And I say 5 because Michael Penix Jr. has picked up steam. He's my quarterback 3 actually in this draft. I think everybody's biggest question for him was the medical, and it seems like that is cleared. So honestly, when you turn on the tape, he's a top 3 quarterback in this draft. So could he potentially be in the running at number 6? I think they truly needed a true number 1 receiver. I also think they need a corner. They need corner help as well. Have a pretty good defensive line. Traded for Brian Burns, which was a big, free agent. I want to say a big trade acquisition for them to really help on the edge. And him and Dexter Lawrence, that's going to be fun football to actually watch. So, safety is another position they could attack as well because they did lose Xavier McKinney as well. But I think receiver and corner are their biggest needs right now because they did sign Runyon and Illuminor this offseason to try to shore up that offensive line. It'll be interesting to see what they do with Evan Neal, though, Breach. Will he compete with Illuminor or will they potentially try to move him inside? I think only time will tell.
Yeah. And you mentioned the defensive front. It's kind of scary how good this defensive front could be this year. It could be a situation, not that the Giants are going to win the Super Bowl, but they're kind of harkening back to the 2017, the 2011 team where we're going to let our pass rush kind of lead our team. But, the thing I think that is the craziest part of this is that I absolutely agree that the number 1 receiver feels like a huge hole. And what is your quarterback supposed to do when he doesn't have a number 1 receiver? So what do you really know about Daniel Jones? And I'm not saying he's a great quarterback, but you're not putting him in a position to succeed necessarily. So I think I would ask you have the 6th overall pick. Would you be looking to take a quarterback, or would you say, you know what, why don't we try and get this number 1 receiver and then see what this offense can do when we actually have a top talent at that position?
Well, it's kind of a conundrum, right? Because if you look at it, it's a similar situation that the Chicago Bears were in, right? Ryan Poles inherited a quarterback. HGM wants to be attached to a quarterback that they pick, whether it's free agency or through the draft, right? When you look at this, Joe Shane, same situation. He inherited Daniel Jones. He didn't pick Daniel Jones. Brian Daboll didn't pick Daniel Jones. So it's a scenario where we've been with this guy 2 years. We've seen what we need to see. I think if we have a chance to take a franchise guy and have him sit for a year, why not do that? Now, again, even if you sit this guy for a year, how do you expect to go out there and compete without a true number 1 receiver, right? And maybe they don't intend to compete. Maybe they let's not forget Brian Daboll was able to take this team to the playoffs his first year in tight-knit games. A lot of that had to do with Saquon Barkley, who is no longer in the fold. And I did bring in Devin Singletary, who I thought had a really good year for the Houston Texans last year. But to me, if you feel like there's a franchise quarterback, and just knowing how GMs and head coaches think that you can attach your name to, that you think can really run your system well, I think they're going to lean to take a quarterback at number 6, right? I could even see the Giants potentially maybe trying to get aggressive. We'll see what happens. But if a guy falls to them at 6, I know a lot of the Giants fans, the J.J. McCarthy thing, they've been upset about that, but they've done extensive work on him, Drake May, and also Michael Penix Jr. If one of those 3 or all 3 fall to them, I think it's going to be hard-pressed for the Giants not to take a quarterback, Brees.
All right, we're going from a team that might take a quarterback in the first round to a team that will definitely be taking a quarterback in the first round, and that is the Washington Commanders. They have had a busy offseason. They fired their coach. They hired Dan Quinn. I think they've signed more players than anyone else.
20 players, I think.
20. It's like every time I woke up for the past 2 weeks or since free agency started, it was the Commanders signed a new player. And it's just like, how are there any players left to sign? They have everyone. It's over. You can stop signing people, Washington.
Exactly.
So considering the fact that they signed 20 new players, what do you think is still left as their biggest need?
I mean, Adam Peters and Dan Quinn went to work, Brees, in regards to really turning over this roster. Because when you think about it, right, it's a 53-man roster. I think 47 play on game day. They've signed 20 guys to this roster. You said 20 new guys will be making this team, right? So it's just like insane when you look at it. And Dan Quinn being a defensive-minded coach, he brought some friends from Dallas, obviously, right? When you look at what they've done with Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler, bringing those guys on. I've been telling people for the longest, Frankie Louvu was my favorite signing in free agency. Ooh. And I'm not calling him Michael Parsons, but if you probably haven't been able to watch him because he played for the Jets and Panthers, but if you see his skill set, he's a great rusher on the edge. I know, I'm a Jets guy, so I can say that. He's a great rusher on the edge, plays with a different type of physicality, right? He's going to bring a different physicality to that defense that Dan Quinn is going to love. I guarantee you he uses him like he used Michael Parsons with Dallas, right? So you talked about 20 signings. They had to rectify that offensive line. They got Tyler Biadasz, signed Nick Allegretti, who has Super Bowl experience as well. They've done a really good job. So when you look at this roster, I think corner makes a lot of sense because they did lose Fuller in the offseason. Quarterback is the obvious one, right? They need a quarterback first and foremost. But besides quarterback, because we're already saying that's obvious, I think getting a third receiver, because they did lose Curtis Samuel to the Buffalo Bills, makes a lot of sense in the cornerback position attacking that.
You know, you mentioning these moves that you like, I'm not going to say the Commanders are going to make the playoffs this season, but it really feels like what the Texans did last offseason, where they made a lot of smart free agent signings, and everything was going to hinge on the quarterback they drafted and how well it ended up being CJ Stroud, obviously, and then how well was he going to play in his rookie year, and he looked phenomenal. And so if the Commanders draft a quarterback that plays CJ Stroud level football, they become a contender.
That's saying a lot, though. CJ Stroud, to me, was a top 5 quarterback last year.
Yeah, that's not something you usually get from a rookie. But, I mean, you mentioned Frankie Louvu, but they signed so many defensive guys on these kind of one-year prove-it deals where Dan Quinn's thinking, I can mold them into something I want to see on defense, whether it's Cleveland Farrell or Dante Fowler, Bobby Wagner, I think could play well for them. So, yeah, and like you said, quarterback is the obvious one. Who do you think they're going to end up taking?
To me, it just makes sense for Jaden Daniels when you look at their offensive coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury, and where he's come from and his history as far as the spread and having a quarterback that has mobility. Now, a lot of people have said, could they try to potentially trade up to 1 because he worked with them and Caleb Williams? I don't think the Chicago Bears are listening to anybody at the number 1 overall pick. I think it's kind of solidified that he's going number 1. But I think Jaden is the most dynamic quarterback when you talk about how explosive he is as a runner. And to me, he has the most calming presence in the pocket, which is rare for a guy that has that type of ability running the football. I think he does mechanically things that other quarterbacks in this draft don't do as far as his calm and his presence, his footworks. And he's a better thrower than people are actually giving him credit for, right? Yes, he had 2 good receivers, but they didn't say that about Joe Burrow when he had 2 good receivers, right? He does things in the pocket that are like boring fundamental-wise, but things that you need to do to have success. We saw CJ Stroud, right? He was a guy that fundamentally was better than every other quarterback in that draft last year. I think that was lost. People got enamored with the all-platform of Bryce Young and the processing, but being able to play the position, right, the fundamentals behind it, the boring stuff, Jaden Daniels does that well, and he has the explosive ability as a runner. I think with Cliff Kingsbury, it just makes sense for him to go 2 overall.
I think that most people probably agree that Caleb Williams is probably the most polished quarterback in the draft. Do you think Jaden Daniels has the highest ceiling?
To me, that's a good question. I think Caleb has the highest ceiling because the things that I just talked about, he can do. We've seen it on tape as far as processing and getting the ball out of his hands, throwing in time and rhythm. And then obviously the things people get enamored with is him outside the pocket, some of the wild throws. But we've seen it on tape of him living within the structure of the offense and doing it. We just need to see it more consistently. With Jaden Daniels, I'm not saying you know what you're going to get. I think he does have a lot of upside, but we've actually seen him live within the construct of the offense. And then when nothing's there, we see him take it off. Like where Caleb, I think he was pressing so much last year where he would get off the progression and take off and try to be Mr. Superman. You didn't really see that from Jaden Daniels.